Jordan Rivera had lived in the Willow Creek Estates for just under a year. He moved in after closing a major deal with his startup, finally affording the modern 4-bedroom home with a sweeping backyard and an Olympic-length pool. Most of the neighbors were quiet, middle-aged professionals who liked trimmed hedges, HOA newsletters, and strictly regulated street parking. Jordan, on the other hand, was in his early 30s, social and unapologetically ambitious. He respected the rules, but didn't see the need to shrink himself for anyone, especially not Karen Whitmore. Karen was a legend in the neighborhood, not for good reasons. She had taken it upon herself to be the HOA's unofficial watchdog. If your garbage can was out past collection hours, Karen would snap a picture and email it to the board. If your lawn was a 1/4 inch too long, she'd leave a passive-aggressive note in your mailbox. Don't. And if someone dared to host a party, she'd call it a disruption, even if it ended by 9. It was her mission to preserve what she called community standards. Though most neighbors just tried to avoid crossing her, Jordan had clashed with her twice already. Once for repainting his shutters, a shade darker than the approved beige, and another time for installing smart lighting that she claimed looked like a nightclub. So when Jordan decided to throw a summer kickoff pool party, he knew it would ruffle feathers, but he didn't care. He had earned every inch of his success, and this was his way of celebrating with the people who mattered. He started planning a month in advance. Invitations were sent through a private RSVP system. It was an invite-only event, capped at 50 people, with private valet, professional security, a catering crew, and even a small live band that specialized in low-volume acoustic sets. It was not a rave. It was an upscale mixer with friends, clients, and a few influencers he'd worked with on campaigns. His backyard had recently been landscaped, lights professionally installed, and sound levels tested to comply with local ordinances. Every detail was curated to keep it classy. One of Jordan's close friends, Devin, worked in the governor's office as a communications advisor. Devin had always spoken highly of Jordan's work ethic, and they'd become good friends over the years. When Jordan casually mentioned the pool party, Devin asked if he could bring a few family members visiting from out of town, including the governor's niece and her parents. Jordan was surprised but said yes without hesitation. He didn't advertise it, didn't name drop. It was just a few more people, more family than political. Meanwhile, Kieran had caught wind of Jordan's pool party through whispers at the HOA Garden Club. She didn't know who was attending or what was being planned, but she knew one thing: if Jordan was involved, it had to be inappropriate. She started making her usual rounds, peeking from her window, taking note of every box delivered and every technician entering the property. She even asked a landscaper trimming a nearby lawn if he'd heard anything about loud music and strangers at Jordan's home. In Jordan's mind, he had everything under control. The pool area was gated and safe. Lifeguards were on standby, and there were no minors coming without parents. The alcohol would be professionally served, and the music had a firm cutoff time. He even emailed the HOA board 2 weeks before the event, notifying them about the gathering, attaching the permit he'd secured, and detailing the measures he'd taken to comply with local codes. He got a short, dry response thanking him for the notice, but he knew Karen would still find a reason to stir up trouble. As the week of the party approached, Jordan doubled down on preparations. He rented additional patio seating, brought in fire pits, and ensured the band had everything they needed. His guest list was filled with young professionals, creatives, and business leaders, people who appreciated good company and high standards. It wasn't a college bash. It was a carefully orchestrated evening of networking, good food, and summer vibes. Still, Karen watched. She recorded video of speakers being installed. She timed how long the valet team spent doing a dry run. Called the HOA board to ask questions under the guise of concern for community safety. She even took pictures of party supply deliveries, convinced she was building a case, but what she didn't know was who some of those guests were, especially the governor's family. She had no idea that one of the SUVs that would pull up that evening carried the very people who regularly appeared in state press conferences. She didn't know that her attempt to ruin what she saw as a neighborhood nuisance would backfire in a way that would echo across every HOA email chain for months to come. For Jordan, it It was just a pool party, a thank you to his network, a personal milestone celebration. But for Karen, it was war. And she had no idea that the people she would try to sick the police on were the last ones you wanted to cause a scene with. Asterisk Saturday morning arrived, bathed in sunlight. The sky was a perfect blue, not a single cloud in sight. A soft breeze whispered through the tall oaks lining Willow Creek Estates. Jordan stood at the edge of his pool, sipping his coffee and soaking in the calm before the whirlwind of the day ahead. The water shimmered like glass, the white lounge chairs lined up in pristine symmetry. And every corner of the backyard looked like it had been pulled straight from a luxury magazine. His phone buzzed with a string of messages caterers confirming final arrival times, the valet company announcing the first wave of staff arriving in an hour, and a text from Devon, governor's niece and her family just landed. They're excited for tonight. Thanks again, man. Jordan replied with a thumbs up and a smile. If there was one thing he was proud of, it was his ability to bring people together. This wasn't just a party. It was a symbol of how far he'd come. Just a few years ago, he was working out of coffee shops, pitching ideas that no one wanted. To here now, he had a home in one of the city's most elite neighborhoods, was throwing a party attended by people in high office, and had built something meaningful. He wasn't just part of the neighborhood, he had earned his place in it by early afternoon. His backyard was a hive of quiet activity. The catering team rolled in with polished steel trays, canopies, and signature cocktails already pre-mixed and chilled. Jordan greeted them personally, making sure everything was going smoothly. The setup was subtle but elegant. Charcuterie stations, seasonal fruit platters, sliders with truffle aioli, and a gourmet taco bar tucked in the corner near the pergola. Everything was designed to encourage conversation. The band arrived next. 3 musicians with acoustic guitars and soft percussion began doing sound checks on the far side of the yard, their melodies light and mellow. Jordan had deliberately chosen them over a DJ or full band to avoid noise complaints. The sound wouldn't carry past his yard's perimeter, and every decibel was measured to comply with HOA rules. Still, Jordan was well aware that compliance didn't mean protection not. When Karen was involved, around 4:30 p.m., the first guests began to arrive. Valet attendants wearing matching polo shirts directed traffic like professionals, ensuring that no car lingered too long on the street. Jordan welcomed everyone at the side gate, giving hugs, shaking hands, and offering drinks as they entered. Within an hour, the backyard was full of laughter, soft music, and lively chatter. The guests were a mix of friends, former colleagues, and new business partners. Young professionals clinked glasses by the pool. A local chef Jordan had recently collaborated with brought samples of his latest menu, setting up a tasting table that quickly became a hit. People were already pulling out their phones to snap pictures of the sunset view and the carefully curated decor. It was elegant without being over the top. Jordan's signature at exactly 6:10 p.m. Devon arrived with the governor's niece, her husband, and their 2 teenage children. They came without fanfare, dressed casually but neatly, blending in with the crowd. Devon pulled Jordan aside to introduce them, and the governor's niece, Amelia, thanked him for the invitation. "This is beautiful," she said, admiring the garden lighting and pool layout. "Feels like we're at a resort." Jordan smiled. "You're welcome anytime." They took a quiet table near the fire pit while the teenagers wandered over to the poolside and joined a group playing light games. No one in the crowd seemed to recognize them, and Jordan had made no announcement. He wanted them to feel at ease, to enjoy the event without being the center of attention. That discretion would end up saving him in more ways than one. Meanwhile, just 3 houses away, Karen was pacing back and forth in her upstairs hallway, binoculars in one hand, her phone in the other. She had already documented several infractions in her mind music, valet traffic, into many unfamiliar faces. She couldn't see anything outright illegal, but it didn't matter. In her eyes, this party was a disruption to the moral fiber of the neighborhood. She told herself she had no choice but to act. What if someone slipped and drowned in the pool? What if one of the guests damaged property? What if underage drinking was happening behind the hedges? By 7 p.m., Karen had called the HOA emergency contact number 3 times and left 2 voicemails. With no response, she decided to escalate matters. She dialed 911. "This is Karen Whitmore from Willow Creek Estates," she said, her voice sharp and urgent. "There's a large, possibly unauthorized event happening at one of the homes here. Music, drinking, cars blocking driveways, and underage individuals unsupervised near a pool. It's getting out of hand. You need to send someone before something happens." The dispatcher calmly took down her details and said they would send a patrol to investigate. Karen, satisfied that she'd done her civic duty, turned to her upstairs window, eyes locked on the glowing lights of Jordan's backyard, a smug grin creeping across her face. Back at the party, the atmosphere was at its peak. Conversations buzzed, glasses clinked, the band played a light rendition of "Stand By Me." The governor's family was engaged in laughter around the fire pit. Jordan felt completely at peace, unaware that blue and red lights would soon reflect against the walls of his home, and Karen had no idea just how far out of her depth she was about to be. Asterisk, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the soft hues of dusk painted the sky, Jordan felt a swell of pride. The evening had unfolded better than he could have imagined. The lighting set the perfect ambience. The acoustic band was hitting all the right notes, and the catering staff moved like clockwork, delivering trays of gourmet appetizers with practiced grace. Guests mingled effortlessly, laughing, sipping wine, and admiring the view that Willow Creek Estates was known for. He glanced over toward the fire pit where Amelia, the governor's niece, was deep in conversation with Devin and a few others. Her husband stood nearby chatting with a local developer Jordan had invited. From across the pool, one of Amelia's kids was roasting a marshmallow with another teen. Their laughter carried lightly through the air. Everything felt seamless, understated, elegant, and completely under control. Jordan had been careful too. Stay within every rule and code, and it showed. Then, the soft melody of the band was interrupted, first by a low murmur through the guests, then by the unmistakable sound of sirens in the distance. Jordan froze. He turned toward the front of his house as the distant sound grew louder. A few guests exchanged curious glances, and a hush rippled through the party. The band faded out mid-song. Then, 2 police cruisers slowly rolled into view, their lights flashing, but sirens now off. The sudden intrusion shattered the relaxed atmosphere like a dropped wine glass. Jordan's first thought was disbelief. Was this some sort of misunderstanding? A traffic incident nearby? But as the officers stepped out of their vehicles and approached his driveway, it became painfully clear they were here for his party. He moved quickly through the side gate and intercepted them at the front. "Evening, officers," he said, calm but tense. "Can I help you?" One of them, Officer Daniels, a middle-aged man with a relaxed but professional demeanor, nodded. "Good evening, sir. We received a call about a possible disturbance. Noise, crowding, alleged underage drinking, and a concern over public safety near a pool." Jordan let out a slow breath, biting back frustration. There must be some mistake. "I submitted a permit for the gathering. It's private, RSVP only. We have professional catering, valet, and I hired a licensed lifeguard. We're fully compliant with local code and HOA rules." Before the officers could respond, a voice shrieked from behind. I told you this was out of control." Karen stormed down the sidewalk like a drama teacher at curtain call. She was still in her house slippers, hair pinned up with what looked like a pencil, and waving her phone as though it were a badge. "They've got music. They're letting teenagers run wild. There are strangers everywhere. This isn't a nightclub. This is a family neighborhood." Jordan exhaled sharply. Of course it was Karen. The officers turned toward her, clearly not appreciating the volume or tone. Officer Daniels lifted a hand. "Ma'am, thank you for your concern. We'll handle this." Karen huffed, clearly expecting more of a reaction. "You'd better," she said, folding her arms tightly across her chest. "This entire thing is a violation." As she turned to glare at Jordan, a quiet but firm voice rose from behind. "Excuse me, officers," Amelia said as she stepped forward, composed and poised, with Devin right behind her. I'm going to have to ask what exactly is being investigated here." Both officers straightened slightly. Officer Daniels blinked as recognition settled on his face. "Ma'am, you look familiar, are you?" "Yes," Amelia replied, offering a polite but tight smile. "My husband and I are here with our children as guests. I'm Amelia Garrett, Governor Rowan's niece. We were personally invited to this gathering, which has been nothing but respectful and well managed. I don't see any cause for alarm." The other officer, younger and visibly rattled, gave Jordan a look that silently asked, "Is this for real?" Jordan gave a tiny nod. Karen's expression twisted in slow motion. She looked at Amelia, then Devin. Then at the guests now gathering near the fire pit, some with phones out, others whispering. "The governor's family is here," she said, voice trembling as her certainty crumbled. Amelia nodded. "Yes. And this party is well within its rights. I find it disturbing that a neighbor would resort to calling 911 over something as peaceful and respectful as this." Officer Daniels turned back to Karen. "Ma'am, it appears this event is fully permitted and under control. There's no evidence of any wrongdoing here. Misuse of emergency services for non-emergencies can result in consequences, including citations," Karen stammered. "I was just trying to keep the community safe. It's my duty to report. Reporting is one thing," the younger officer cut in. "Calling in a false emergency is another. Please refrain from making further calls unless there's an actual violation or safety risk." Jordan stayed quiet, his hands at his sides, jaw tight. He didn't need to say anything. Karen's silence, the growing crowd, and the flashing lights told the whole story. Amelia turned back to him and smiled. "He handled that with more grace than I would have, Jordan. This has been a lovely evening. Don't let it get derailed." He gave her a grateful nod. "Thank you, really." The officers gave a short nod and returned to their cruisers, the lights flickering off. Slowly, the crowd dispersed back into the party, a little quieter now, but full of knowing glances. Karen stood in the street for a few more seconds before retreating to her house, her face flushed with defeat. Jordan exhaled and walked back into his yard, where the music started to pick up again, this time with a quiet confidence. He hadn't just survived the interruption, he had turned the moment into something unforgettable, and Karen would never forget who she had tried to cross. The air had shifted noticeably after the police left. For a few minutes, the backyard had felt like a theater stage after a dramatic climax, tense, still heavy with the unspoken. But slowly, as the final glow of twilight gave way to the soft lighting of lanterns and string lights, the laughter returned. Conversations picked back up. Glasses refilled. The acoustic band, now emboldened, resumed their gentle melodies. If anything, the incident had only strengthened the atmosphere. It wasn't just a party anymore. It was an event everyone would remember. Jordan stood at the edge of the patio, watching as Amelia and her husband reassured a few nearby guests that everything was fine. The way she carried herself with dignity and calm despite the drama was something he deeply admired. She wasn't loud or show, she just exuded presence. Devin gave Jordan a thumbs up from across the yard. The message was clear. You handled that like a pro. But inside Jordan's chest, a quiet storm brewed, not because of the police, not because of embarrassment, but because of Karen. Her stunt could have ended differently. If the officers had been more aggressive or less informed, the night might have taken a darker turn. And not just for him, but for his guests, his reputation, his business. All because one woman decided her personal dislike outweighed logic or decency. The murmurs among the neighbors confirmed it. Karen had gone too far this time. People were talking, and not in hushed tones either. One couple near the koi pond were openly shaking their heads, muttering about how Karen had finally lost the plot. Another pair of longtime residents, the Harrisons, were telling anyone who would listen that they'd warned the HOA board months ago about Karen's unhealthy obsession. With enforcement, Amelia made her way back toward Jordan with her husband in tow. "I know we said this already," she began, placing a hand on his arm, "but this was one of the best evenings we've had in a long time. You handled everything with such class," her husband added. "We've been to formal events That didn't go this smoothly. The food, the people, the vibe, it's clear you put thought into every detail. Jordan smiled, grateful for the kindness, but still simmering under the surface. I'm just sorry for the interruption. That was never part of the plan. Amelia chuckled. Every community has one. But I suspect yours may have just signed her own exit notice. It was a curious phrase. Jordan gave her a look, and she explained a neighbor like that only survives if the community tolerates her. The moment they stop, when she stops being feared and starts being ridiculed, her influence evaporates. And tonight, that happened. After they left smiling, waving, walking out to the valet like nothing had gone wrong, Jordan took a deep breath and returned to the party. It continued. For another 2 hours without incident, no further noise complaints, no flashing lights. Just good people, good music, and a hum of quiet rebellion against the pettiness that tried to ruin it. The next morning, the text messages started. Few thank yous from guests, some new contacts for potential partnerships, and then a surprising thread from a neighbor he barely knew, Jennifer, who lived a few houses down. I just wanted to say thank you for last night. It was exactly the kind of energy this neighborhood needs more of. If you ever run for HOA board, you've got my vote. Jordan laughed out loud. Him, on the board? That was the last place he thought he'd belong. But it stuck in his mind longer than it should have. By noon, things escalated. An email hit his inbox subject line. Incident Review, June 14th event. It was from the HOA president, Mr. Richard Sterling, a silver-haired man who typically only showed up to HOA meetings in a three-piece suit, even if it was 100 degrees outside. Jordan opened it cautiously, expecting trouble. Instead, the tone was surprisingly neutral. Dear Mr. Rivera, thank you for your communication prior to your June 14th event and for submitting the proper permits. We have received multiple accounts confirming the professionalism and orderliness of the gathering. The HOA board has been made aware of a 911 call placed by a resident during the event. We consider this matter to be sensitive and will be discussing it in the upcoming emergency session. Please be advised that your compliance with community standards has been noted and appreciated. Regards, Richard Sterling, President, Willow Creek. HOA. Jordan blinked. Emergency session? He wasn't the one in trouble. Karen was. Later that week, word spread quickly. The HOA board had met privately. Several residents, apparently emboldened by Karen's latest spectacles, admitted written complaints. Not just about the 911 call, but about a long pattern of behavior, harassment, intimidation, and misrepresentation of HOA authority. One neighbor even alleged that Karen had taken photos of their children playing in the yard to document unauthorized gatherings. The bombshell came in the form of a community newsletter 2 days later. Buried near the bottom in the meeting summary section was a line that read, Ms. Karen Whitmore has voluntarily stepped down from all committee roles effective immediately. Voluntarily or not, it was clear the board had forced her hand. Jordan read the line twice, then leaned back in his chair. He hadn't said a word to the board, hadn't lodged a single complaint. But the neighborhood had spoken for him. For the first time since moving in, he felt like he truly belonged. Not just tolerated, but supported. And Karen, the self-proclaimed guardian of neighborhood order, had finally been dethroned. Asterisk by the following weekend, Willow Creek Estates no longer felt quite the same. There was a subtle but noticeable shift in the neighborhood, ere like a heavy curtain had finally been lifted. The once ever-watchful eyes of Karen Whitmore's house remained behind closed blinds, her driveway empty, her porch devoid of its usual flower baskets that she meticulously arranged, like sentries guarding propriety. The neighborhood, once so tightly wrapped in passive-aggressive rules and whispered complaints, began to loosen up just a little. Jordan noticed it first during his morning jog. 3 different neighbors waved at him, real waves, not the tight-lipped nods he'd grown used to. One man, Carl from Maple Lane, even slowed his car and rolled down his window just to say, "Heard about what happened. Good for you, man. That was long overdue." Jordan chuckled and thanked him, unsure whether to accept the compliment or pretend like he wasn't the new local celebrity. But the truth was undeniable. Karen's spectacular collapse had somehow turned him from the flashy tech guy with the big pool into the neighborhood's unlikely folk hero. It didn't take long before the story started to spread. People who hadn't even been at the party now claimed to have heard firsthand what had gone down, how the governor's niece had stood up to Karen, how Jordan had handled the police with class, how Karen had been humiliated in front of half the neighborhood. Some versions of the tale were wildly exaggerated, of course. In one, Jordan had threatened to sue the HOA and won instantly. In another, Karen was led away in handcuffs. But Jordan didn't bother correcting any of it. The myth was doing more work than any reality ever could. The biggest surprise came 3 days later, when he received an email from a well-known event planning agency based in the city. The subject line simply read, "Loved your event, let's talk." They had seen photos from the party on social media, specifically the picture Amelia Garrett had posted of the fire pit, captioned, "Who says politics can't unwind in style?" It had quietly racked up thousands of likes, shares, and a short segment in a local lifestyle blog. The agency wanted to know if Jordan would be open to collaborating on future upscale private events. Influencer-hosted parties, political mixers, charity galas. They thought his space had energy. Took the meeting. By the end of the call, Jordan had agreed to host 2 small curated events later that summer. Not only would it add a new layer to his business portfolio, but it also felt like the perfect poetic twist. Karen had tried to shut him down. And now, her actions had indirectly helped launch a whole new opportunity. At the next HOA meeting, the community clubhouse was packed. For once, people arrived early, some even standing in the back. The agenda was short, but item number 3 drew the most attention: community conduct and emergency protocol review. Jordan attended not to gloat, but because he felt he needed to see this through. Richard Sterling, crisp as always in a blazer and pocket square, tapped the mic. "Before we begin today, I'd like to acknowledge the concerns brought forth. After last week's incident at Mr. Rivera's residence, and after careful review, it is clear that the event was compliant with both city ordinances and HOA regulations. I want to thank Mr. Rivera for his professionalism." Jordan nodded, offering a small smile as dozens of eyes turned to him. "Furthermore," Sterling continued, moving forward, "the board will be implementing stricter protocols regarding the use of emergency services to ensure that 911 calls are reserved for actual emergencies. Abuse of such systems reflects poorly on our community and puts others at risk." There was a murmur of agreement around the room. A few people even clapped softly. As the meeting ended, several residents approached Jordan directly. An older woman he'd never met before said, "We need younger energy around here. Maybe you should consider running for the board next year." Another added, "If nothing else, you've got better taste in music than the rest of us." That night, Jordan sat out on his patio, feet up on the edge of the lounge chair, watching the lights in the pool ripple quietly. The backyard was silent. Now, only the faint chirp of crickets and rustling leaves filling the space where just days before laughter and music had bloomed. He sipped his drink slowly, reflecting on everything that had unfolded. He hadn't thrown the party to make a statement. He didn't host with the goal of changing the neighborhood or becoming some sort of figurehead. But it had happened anyway. By simply standing his ground, by refusing to shrink to fit someone else's narrow standards, he'd changed the dynamics of the entire street. Karen, it seemed, had learned the hard way that power built on intimidation and fear doesn't last not. When it collides with community, with resilience, and with a little bit of unexpected star power, Jordan didn't know what the next few months would bring. Maybe he'd host more events. Maybe he'd take that suggestion and run for the board, just to make sure the rules didn't only serve the loudest voice. But for now, he was content, knowing he had earned not just the house, not just the success, but the respect that came with standing tall in the face of someone trying to knock him down. And somewhere behind a dark window, in a house that no longer felt quite so powerful, Karen Whitmore sat in silence, watching the glow of Jordan's patio flicker on, while her own spotlight quietly faded out.